period is repeated in both of the stories. I don't think I've ever noticed that before. But
Weird
it's
that
like,
the woman's had a flow of blood the same amount of time the girl's still alive.
Also, one last note about clean and unclean is they've just returned from a place where Jesus actually sought out someone to heal, and Jesus like really specifically put himself in a situation where he was surrounded by uncleanliness. And now he's coming back and he's being sought out.
Yep. And we have more uncleanness to deal with, right? More ritual impurity, right? So N.T. Wright now makes the change, and he says, Mark breaks off. The story of the older woman not only keeps us in suspense as we wait to find out what happens, and he says you can even sort of picture, and N.T. Wright, which I appreciate and I like to do too, he really wants us to picture ourselves in that story. Like, picture the crowds, picture the smells, picture this woman. Like, what did she look like? Was her head covered? What color's her hair? How tall is she? Like, really try to picture it. And try to picture Jairus and what he looked like and his attitude and what did it look like when they started rushing off together? How fast are they moving and are they running? Just really try to immerse yourself in the story. And then at the point where they stop and have this conversation with the woman, he says, you can almost see Jairus like hopping up and down, like, hey, we were on the way to my house. Like, why are we talking to this woman? Let's go. So what's he doing this whole time? Is he standing there tapping his foot? Is he pulling on Jesus? Like, what's the scene? Because that happens, this inner story with this older woman, and then they move off, and I don't think we've talked about yet this conversation with his disciples at the end of the story with the older woman. So what did you guys think of that part of it?
You mean 31?
Yeah, 31 and to 33, 31, 32, yeah.
So I'm reading from The Voice, and 31 says, his disciples broke the uneasy silence. Disciples, Jesus, the crowd is so thick that everyone is touching you. Why do you ask who touched me? They're like, the questions that they've been like asking him the last chapter are sure something.
I always call them the Keystone Cops, because sometimes they act like that. But in this case, actually, they sort of sound rational. Like, there's a crowd of people that have gone with the synagogue president and Jesus as they move, to go back to Jairus's house, right? There's all these people. And at some point, because again, the story with the woman happens in silence as far as anybody else is concerned. She says to herself, like in her mind, we don't think she said it out loud, if I can just touch his clothes, I'll be healed. So this whole, it's like a pantomime. It happens like off screen, totally silently. And so the crowd's rushing, Jesus and Jairus, they're rushing to the house, and all of a sudden Jesus stops and he goes, who touched me? Like, the disciples are like, sir, a lot of people. Is he losing his mind or what? What do you mean, who touched you? Do you see all these people? So Wright thinks, at least for himself, for N.T. Wright, the bishop, that this is a really good example of the possibility, at least, or the probability that this is a first-person account of the life of Jesus Christ. Because why in the world would you insert this little conversation between him and the disciples? It serves no purpose to the story. And it kind of makes Jesus look dumb. So, I mean, I never thought about it that way before. And I think as I've told you guys, like, for all I know, all of these things happened exactly as we're told, minute by minute, word for word. On the other hand, they could all just be great stories. I'm good with that either way. They still have a lot of power for me either way. But right, he's like, it sounds to him like this is a first person account of this interchange, because why else would it be there? 100 years later, they're still telling the story and they're still making the comment about the disciples. I don't know. Okay, so what do you think? We ready to move on? More about the lady? No? Moving on. Okay. Would somebody like to read Mark 5:35 through, I believe, the end of the chapter, 43?
I can do it.
Well, thank you for volunteering, Sarah.
Sure. Okay. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he pulled them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up, began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this, they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat.
Okay. So before Rachel shares with us what she wanted to bring to the conversation tonight, what do you guys think about that part of the story? What do you see? What do you hear?
I think it's interesting that they use the word bother. Like, if your daughter was dying, would you just be bothering someone to help her? Or would it be a little bit more pressing than that?
Yeah.
Strange.
Yeah, and they lift up Jesus as the teacher too. They use that phrase, and it's like, well, yeah, but he's the synagogue president, so doesn't he have some, like, if anybody gets to bother the teacher, isn't it him?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also a big thing of looking at, they don't believe in his full power. Because it's like, well, if she's dead, okay, there's nothing you can do, because they're looking at it like any other medical type thing. Of whatever it is that they had at that time, you wouldn't do anything with a dead body. It's, what can you do to help prevent that?
Mm-hmm. I think that points back to what Rachel said earlier about this agenda that they had. Well, she's sick, Jesus can heal her, but now that she's dead, at least in these guys' minds, like, well, it's too late now, right? Nobody can raise the dead. I think it's interesting, and I have no reason why, but I think it's interesting that at this point, when it's announced that she's dead, he pares down who gets to go with him. So now the crowd's not allowed to to watch what happens next. Only his three closest companions, Peter, James, and John, who show up a lot of times in scripture as Peter, James, and John. And so they're allowed to go and watch, but nobody else is. And then actually reading closer in the story, those are the only way he put everybody. So the mourners, you guys know about mourners, right? Public mourning, you know about that? They were actually paid or they're really good. Some cultures pay them. And if you're a family of some note, or you want to be seen of a family of some note, and you would hire mourners to make it look like more people were sorry your loved one died. But you could make money being a good crier. You really can. And in other cultures, these are just people in the village that are really good at it, and they just show up willingly. So either way, have you ever heard anybody, you can YouTube it later, but have you ever heard people keen, K-E-E-N? And it's this wailing that's usually, the word keening is almost always associated with death. And it's eerie. Lots of cultures do it. The ones I know about that might be the easiest to find would be North American Native cultures. One time years and years ago, funny story, when my mom was in the hospital, having just had a heart attack, and she had open heart surgery, and then you have to go stay in ICU for 48 hours, regardless of how well you're doing. And being my mom, she was just fine and complaining about the taste of the food in ICU. And in the next cubicle, which back in the day was just a screen in ICU and not like a separated room, a young man had been riding his motorcycle without a helmet and crashed. And they were holding him in stasis basically until the whole family could show up. And then they would, release him to pass on. And as the family was showing up, and they were a Native family, they were keening, in the ICU. And my mom was complaining about the food. And I had to tell her to button it because, somebody was dying like 3 feet away. But that's my mom. So honestly, just if you want to get a picture of what it looked like at Jairus's house, YouTube professional mourners, because that's what was happening, right? So he tells all those people, he shuts all those people out of the house. And a lot of them probably were family. And he only lets Peter, James, and John and mom and dad in the room when he raises her from the dead. So, and there's a clue as to why at the end of the story. So, Rachel, do you want to enlighten us?
Yes, I started searching out some art because I anticipated that Jan might have some art for us, or might want to be engaged in art. Nope. And this was literally like the first result. And it is, I'm putting it in the chat. So it's an analysis of 2 different sarcophagi from the early church. And it's, oh, Jan, you are muted.
I'm going to see if I can let you screen share.
Okay.
Okay, go for it. Keep talking.
Okay. But it's kind of long, so I just shared it in the chat if you would like to seek it out yourselves. Let's see if I can.
I have just made you co-host.
Great. Share my screen. I have 6 million tabs open. Okay. So here is one sarcophagi, and so here is a close-up on one tradition of sarcophagi. So this article goes into the fact that in the same way that there are many, many different sects of Christianity now and many, many different sects of Judaism now that have different values around different things, that there were, within the early church, it wasn't a monolith. That there were different sects within the early church. And in certain ways, some of them were more influenced with traditionally Jewish values, and some became more Roman. And she is analyzing, I haven't looked super deep into it, but it's just very fascinating to me just from a looking over this. But this first sect is from a more Jewish and a more egalitarian Jewish tradition. And it the artist chooses to depict Jairus's wife as a partner. They are in communication with one another. This is Jesus with a wand. Apparently a ton of early church art depicted Jesus with a wand. That was just something that they decided was going to let the viewer know that Jesus is doing some sort of healing or magic. But that in this first one, Jairus and his wife are in communication together about their daughter. They are partners, they are equals. And then in the Roman tradition, Jairus's wife is on the ground.
Oh, wow.
That she's the one, even in the Bible, it says Jairus threw himself at Jesus's feet. But at this other one, it shows more than just the apostles, the disciples. It shows a ton of men who are all standing up, and she is on the ground.
So if I had looked at that, I would have thought that they were depicting the two stories as one, and that's the woman with the flow of blood on the ground.
Well, this
That's
is
not it.
No.
Fascinating.
And it definitely goes deeper into the fact that certain Roman traditions or certain sects that had more Roman members may have chosen to adopt a more paterfamilias value system so as to not offend Roman members. But that at that time, there were even some Jewish sects that had not just like a male synagogue leader, but they had a male and female synagogue leader that were. A lot of churches now have like co-pastors who are married, but these had they had to have a woman leader. Like there was always going to be a male leader who sort of had a Moses role, and there was always a woman leader who had a Miriam role. And that whenever we sort of hear people talking about, oh, well, in Jesus's day, women had a certain place, and it's like, yeah, they did. They had all sorts of certain places. And so that it's just fascinating to me that even pretty shortly after even this was written down, that people approached this same text in really different ways.
Based on their cultural understandings.
Yes.
So reading the story through their lens.
Yes. And I think it really hasn't occurred to me before that it was important for Jesus to have both of the parents present. That the way that he's approaching this is he very publicly says in front of everyone else, oh, she's not dead, she's just asleep, it's okay. And then his first thing is oh, we have to feed this child. Like, I want her parents here. Like, we need to feed this child. He's so like concerned with the well-being, like the emotional well-being.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jesus, he breaks those male-female barriers that existed in whatever part of society all the time, because, you know, he speaks to the woman at the well and answers her questions and treats her like an equal, and they're basically discussing religion. And in a lot of different cases, you know, he treats women like actual human beings. The one scene that's so powerful to me, where he's dining at a party and a woman comes in and breaks the alabaster jar of perfume over his head, and he actually uses her as an example to shame his host. So in that sense, he puts the woman above the man and uses her to put him in his place. So yeah, he obviously had a very egalitarian understanding of, you know, the wholeness, the wholesomeness of humanity. Which, yes.
I think this is the first time in Mark that he's like seriously engaging with women or having conversations with women and healing women. Other than when his mom comes to collect him.
Well, yeah, his mom was one of the ones that called him crazy. So, yeah, that's cool stuff. I'm so glad you found that. And I didn't bring any art tonight, so good. Thank you. What do you guys think? No?
I am trying to not view it through the lens of my past. So, because a lot of it, then it's like, okay, but if he said that she was asleep, so she wasn't really dead, or are we talking like a spiritual sense where is this like a confirmation of like purgatory, or like, and it's going very, very literal of like what exactly he said. And so I'm like, but that's not really how I should be viewing this, or the heart of it. It should be more of like looking at what are the actions that are going on. And so I find it's interesting how, and this goes back a little bit, how once he hears that the group are sort of saying, you know, why bother the teacher now? That's when he really makes the change of like, okay, I'm only going to take a select few people to go see this. And it's like they didn't have faith in it then. And so it's like, why should I have to then defend myself? And so then it's like going, and it's like, okay, now I can go do this, and I'll bring specific people with me to show.
Yeah. And yeah, it's all, there's so much more to this than you should just have faith and believe and you'll get well. There's so much more to this, you know? One thing I like that N.T. Wright brought out was this idea, and interesting that they, in that sarcophagi, that they depicted Jesus with the wand, is that Jesus is a miracle worker, not a magician. And there's a difference. And what he does is not just some conjuring trick. You know, so the way N.T. Wright puts it, was very powerful. I want to read it to you. The other odd thing in this story, the first part, is it Jesus' power that rescued the woman or her own faith? And N.T. Wright says, clearly it was Jesus' power, but Jesus says, your faith has rescued you. The answer must be that faith, though itself powerless, is the channel through which Jesus' power can work. That is probably the best description of faith I have ever heard. That our faith is a channel through which the power of God can work. Because without faith, God may be working, but we won't see it.
I don't think I've ever heard it described that way, and it makes a lot of sense. Because it's kind of like faith is, and I always try to think of something that I can think about. So it's like faith is the pipe work.
Yeah, conduit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I underlined, and there's stars and everything. I mean, it's just a fabulous statement. I'll try to remember to include that in the video when I post the video. He's not a magician doing conjuring tricks by some secret power for an amazed but uninvolved audience. That's not what he does. He is, though the onlookers don't yet realize it, God's son, the one through whom the living God is remaking Israel, humans, and the world. And faith, however much fear and trembling may accompany it, is the first sign of that remaking, that renewal, that new life. You know, and again, God can be working and wanting and bringing us to places of renewal and new life, but without faith, we just can't see it. You know, God's not powerless, but if your eyes are closed, you're not going to see it. You know, this is just good stuff. Now, about the sleeping, Wright talks about that too, and I've also heard this from other people, but did Jesus mean asleep? Like, or did Jesus mean dead and just use the word asleep, which he does in other places when he clearly means dead, like John 11:11, if somebody wants to look that up. Sometimes it's like a euphemism for the word dead, and sometimes we're told, no, he's really only sleeping. In this case, you know, again, we, as usual, we have to guess or make a determination based on our faith and our understanding of Jesus, whether or not this little girl was actually clinically dead, or, sorry, as the Princess Bride would say, only sort of dead.
Mostly dead.
Mostly dead. She's not completely dead. I don't know. I mean, one of the things I again and again I try to say, you're probably annoyed with me, but like, it's for each of us. I have 4 little pictures here. It's for each of us to decide. And what Rachel believes that to be true about, you know, the whether or not the breath of life had left this little girl or not, doesn't necessarily affect what Sarah thinks about that. Each person needs to come to our own understanding of who Jesus was, who he is to us, and what our faith does for us. And I'm a firm believer in the fact that until we start making those determinations for ourselves and start really giving deep thought to who the person of Jesus Christ was, our faith is just something we do and not as integrated a part of who we are, you know? And I think integrating our faith into our lives is our life's work, and we never fully get there. You know, that it's the process. Pastor Katie, who's a good Methodist, would say we're in the process of becoming. You know, we don't reach an end, you know? But anyway. What do you think about the fact that they laughed at Jesus?
Rude.
Rude. So not nice.
But again, like when they talk about like don't bother him and then they're laughing at him, it's strange to me that there's so many that aren't, like, it feels like they're not taking it seriously.
So I want to know, like, those two things also don't seem to go together. The person that would hold Jesus in such high esteem that they would say, don't bother the teacher, why would they then laugh at the teacher when he said she's not dead? In that moment, have they decided he must be nuts? Or is it a different group of people? And I think you can kind of tease it apart and say it's possibly 2 different groups of people. The people the messengers that came and said, don't bother the teacher anymore, she's dead. And the mourners and the family back at the house who are mourning the death now, not imminent, what's the word? Like it just happened. Death of this little girl, right?
Mm-hmm.
With it, just moments they've just heard the news. I think it's maybe them that are laughing at him and saying, A, what do you know about it? You just got here. And B, who do you think you are to decide?
Mm-hmm.
My translation says the mourners laughed a horrible, bitter laugh and went back to their wailing. Like, but for me, that's sort of like, if my dad died and I'm like, tell someone like my dad just died, and they're like, well, if he was vegan, he would have lived longer. I would be like, what is wrong with you? I'm done with this. I mean, I could see this being super offensive for them saying like, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're experiencing, this is what we know, like this child has died, like whether or not part of the mourning is like a professional job. Like if you told a funeral director like, oh no, she's not, that kid isn't dead, she's just asleep, the funeral director, like it's his job, he'd be like, what's wrong with you? And I think a huge part of this chapter that I'm noticing, especially with what you said about how like that needs to be something that we need to figure out, like each of us, is that all of these people are getting to decide like by themselves what they believe that Jesus is and isn't capable of and how it all works. Because it's working different for everybody and it is super subjective and it is all based on their own beliefs. Like Jesus is able to heal this girl because like he directs her father to believe. Like he needs someone to believe in order for things to happen. And so these mourners, like it's going to happen whether or not they believe, but they also have, like he doesn't try to convince them. They get to make their own choice.
Yeah. I wonder, never thought about this before. I wonder what the laughers thought when she came walking out. Joke's on you. That would have been a great scene. That'd be a cool movie short. Just show me what it looked like when she came walking back out.
I'll say, he says, don't tell anyone.
I know.
So there's something he's trying to cover up.
It's that Markan secret. Remember we talked about that?
Yeah.
Mark's Jesus always says, don't tell anybody. And N.T. Wright says that's why Jesus peeled away only his 3 followers and the parents to go in and be able to watch her rise from the dead. Because he could tell those 5 people, don't tell anybody. But if the crowd had seen it, he couldn't keep a whole crowd quiet, right? Now,
but the crowd was going to see the result anyway.
Yeah.
Right. But
they were right.
But could the mourners attest to her actual death, or could the mourners only attest to what they've been told? Had they seen the dead body, right? So, and we don't know, and we all know that Jesus kept,
The mourners were right. If like he raised her from the dead, like,
oh,
they were right.
She was dead, right? So when she was walking out, are they like, well, who told us she was dead? They got it wrong? Or are they amazed? I mean, we know that some of the people from stories that Jesus told, be silent, they weren't, they went and told everybody, right? And he doesn't always tell everybody, don't tell. He told the Gentile man in last week's story, go tell everybody. So he doesn't always say, keep it a secret. But it's interesting who he does tell to keep it a secret. And it's, in this case, and in other cases, it's the Jewish authorities or Jews. He says, don't tell anybody. So maybe it didn't matter so much that the former wild man of the tombs told people in his Gentile community. But in this community in Capernaum, if word had got out he was raising people from the dead, it would have caused more of a problem politically.
Also, this is a 12-year-old child. And like there's a sense of vulnerability and like protecting her and her well-being, whereas like the demoniac, everyone knows he's the demon man who lives in the graveyard.
And I want that on my tombstone, you know. So I want to be known throughout history, the demon man who lived in the tomb, you know. Yeah. So then Wright goes into this, you know, he's pulling it all together, you know, he's carrying us along on this journey through Mark. And so he reminds us of the story of the sower and the seeds, and that things have to die in order to come to life again. You have to sow seeds and then they grow. And so he's saying that Mark is perhaps hoping that his readers will hear, as from the previous chapter, that when things go to sleep, then they can rise up. And that's what is happening to the girl. That's what happened to the old lady. And that is a sign that the kingdom of God is breaking into our world little bit by little bit. The things are starting to come back to life that were once dead, right? But of course, it's not going to look like people want it to look, because Israel would like to come back to life and throw off the yoke of Rome, and that doesn't happen. And they were hoping that's what their Messiah would do. But this is a whole new kind of breaking in that Jesus is doing. He also points out that they laughed at him and they're still laughing at us. There's several songs that I like quite a bit that talk about being laughed at as a Christian. And one of them says, it's from Samuel actually, it says, "All become even more undignified than this." Like, watch me act the fool. I don't care if you think my faith is foolish. It's my faith and I believe in it, you know? And we see it a lot in our post-Enlightenment world. People are like, if you can't prove it, if you can't prove he rose from the dead, if you can't show me the scientific facts, I'm not going to believe it. You know, but that's not faith.
It does, that comment, Jen, makes me think of like how obsessed Christians have become, especially in the last century, of like trying to empiricize their faith.
The guy who built the Noah boat in Kentucky, just to prove that the Bible was right, and you can build a boat that big. Now,
the fact
a big float.
Hobby Lobby has stolen artifacts from Near Eastern countries in order to like empiricize their faith. And Jesus here is like, I don't have to prove anything to anybody. Like, your faith doesn't actually have to do with like anything being proved. And right. I don't want people coming to interview this child who just died. And like, that doesn't need to happen. And also, all he says to the mourners is, "Why are you making this sorrowful noise? The child isn't dead, she's just sleeping." Like, he has verbally eviscerated people who didn't believe that he could do what he said he could do, and he does not do this here. His response to their unbelief is really, really different. And I think that's very interesting, that he makes space for them being like, actually, screw you.
It is kind of, except for I don't know that he's commenting on their faith. He's just commenting on the reality. Because these aren't people that we know of in the story. We're not told whether or not they should have believed in what he was doing, right? They know Jairus has gone to get him, to bring him, to heal her. But in the meantime, she's died. I don't know. I was always very confused as to why Jesus said she's only asleep, if she wasn't actually asleep, if she was actually dead. And I used to worry that Jesus was a liar until somebody told me that being asleep was often used as a euphemism. You know.
Sometimes things are gray.
Right. I'm getting more okay with gray all the time.
Well, but what if you, so if asleep is just a euphemism for dead, then replace the two words. And then he's saying she's just dead. What does that mean? Like, don't be afraid. She's just dead.
I also find it a little interesting if Jesus is also using a ploy here at the same time. Because if he tells the people outside that she's asleep and then goes in, and then when she's awake, like when he revives her and she's no longer dead, that gives away if he gave strict orders not to tell anyone about this. So the mother and father and his 3 disciples were in there and saw it and recognize it, but it also is leading to that he's not ready yet.
Oh, I see what you're doing. If he'd allowed them to continue to grieve like she was dead, and then she appeared again, there'd be hundreds of people saying, well, she was dead and now she's alive. But because he's prefaced the healing by saying she's only asleep, that still sounds like he's lying. I'm going to have to think about that. This is how I've always understood it until this moment when Misha just messed it up for me. I've always understood it where Jesus was sort of like saying to the people, she is actually only asleep because I'm going to raise her from the dead. So don't be so upset. Like he's trying to like comfort them. Like don't grieve yourselves. It's really not that bad, because he knows he's going to walk in and raise her from the dead, and she'll come walking back out. So there will have been no reason for their grief. So that's how I've always sort of put the pieces together.
If this is for a Jewish audience, maybe. Mark is not for a Jewish audience.
It's for a Gentile audience.
It's for a Gentile audience, so they're going to have very different euphemisms about sleeping and death. And so, again, with gender stuff, like, this is totally focused on women. And, like, those euphemisms don't matter. And, like, Gentiles have a really different idea of, like, death in the afterlife. And
yeah, that's true.
Like, Jesus is pulling back from that, and he's saying, actually, what's happening right here, right now, like, is what really matters. And then it finishes up with him, like, addressing her physical, like, alive person needs of food.
But sort of the proof that he raised her from the dead was now she'll be hungry. Like, calling to mind her physical body and its physical needs, right? Yeah, I know. Again, I process a lot, and it really comes down. It's like for me, it's always a matter of putting the pieces together of like my personal experience, what the Bible says, what the early church teachers taught, to put together a Christology that is legitimate, meaning it's not fanciful or that I try to whitewash away things that are problematic, and workable. You know, because I know a lot of people that have a Christology that's killing them. Is that right? I mean, in the sense that their Christology is all about their unworthiness and Christ's divinity, and this command that they must also become morally divine. And they're never going to get there. And the constant guilt is killing them inside. And yet they're driven over and over back to the church that's teaching this same philosophy. And I'm not going to say it's wrong. I'm saying it's not workable. It's not livable. It's not holistic in the sense of allowing someone to live a full and healthy physical, spiritual, and mental life. And so when I run into these questions, I'm like, suppose Jesus was lying, right? Am I okay with a Jesus who lies? How does a Jesus who tells lies fit into my Christology of a morally perfect being? I'll spin on that for a couple of days.
Is lying always morally imperfect?
Have I told you people the baby story, the way I raised my children? And I hope none of you ever have a child that's ugly, but if you do, whenever anybody in my immediate family, so me, my former spouse, Kurt, and our two kids, if you bring us a baby that's less than technically attractive, we'll say, what a cute outfit, where did you get it? And it's code in our family for what an unattractive child. It's not actually lying. It's close.
I mean, I could see also Jesus easily getting away with the technicality if you want to give that option, because it could very much be that she is actually asleep, but will die soon.
Right. Has the last breath left her body. And Rachel, speaking about breath, I want to ask you about blood. So am I right, because I know I've been taught this, that at least a majority of the ancient Jewish thought was that life resided in the blood and not in the breath?
I don't know. And I also don't know about Greek and Roman, but like if you think about
No, just Jewish.
I don't know. I can't answer that.
I mean, I've always been
I'll have
taught
to
I feel like
look that up.
down there.
I'm gonna go to myjewishlearning.com, which is my favorite site to basically, destroy my entire theology. Because it's like, this like thing that I just have been really frustrated. Sorry to derail everything, but the past month I've been like really frustrated with like Christians who are like trying to like unlearn parts of their faith, and they're like, what about like this and this and this, or like I really feel like I need to hold on to this, or like I don't know. And it's like, if you have a master's in divinity and it's really clear that you haven't actually researched anything about Jewish religion at all.
It's easy if you go to Moody Bible Institute. They're never going to mention Jews at all, except for every time they mention Jesus.
Like, seriously, it's really frustrating to me that like Christians are like, super hyper focused on Jesus because they don't know what to make of the Old Testament.
Right. There's no way to incorporate it, so we're going to ignore it and say it's not relevant.
And like the only way that they can, like this super one right way, like there's one right answer, and it's Jesus. And an inability to sort of like move past like Jesus versus the Jews, or like Jesus is like tearing down these like super strict religious leaders and without understanding that like the Pharisees are the religious sect that their like intellectual ancestors wrote the Talmud. That these guys have been fighting with each other about stuff for like hundreds of years. Yeah. And Jesus is just another rabbi who's fighting with other rabbis about stuff. But thank you for asking about the blood. I'm looking it up right now.
Cool.
Again, like talk about uncleanliness. Like if this is a dead body, if this is a dead body and they're hanging out with a dead body, they're all ritually unclean now.
Yeah, exactly.
And Jesus is like, we're not going to do anything about this.
Yeah, we're going to go make food now. While you're looking that up, I want to ask a question, because N.T. Wright spends almost 2 pages talking about this question that a lot of people ask. And so I'm wondering if any of you have ever thought this. Why did Jesus apparently only raise 3 people from the dead and not the possibly thousands of people that died while he was walking around? In other words, why didn't he just go around and just raise everybody from the dead? And is that unfair? Like, Sarah's brain has never gone there. Did you ever think that, Misha?
No.
Sarah?
Sarah's talking, so go for it, Sarah.
Well, that's a question. Like, why does God allow evil? Why wouldn't Jesus just abolish death? Well, there's a reason for death. Like, there would be no urgency to get anything done in your life if death wasn't impending at some point. Like that's part of the necessary suffering of life. Like, you can't just get rid of death altogether. And that doesn't make. Yeah, I think. I mean, he's picking the people that he's raising from the dead to make a point.
That's exactly what Wright says. And I mean, really, like, how crowded would McDonald's be if nobody died? It'd be unworkable.
I think.
Right, then why would Jesus have died on the cross if, yeah.
You can also, you can take the perspective, of course, it's like, well, it's all part of the plan. It's all part of God's plan. But I think the other perspective is like, how do we know it's not better for them? Right? It's sort of like, oh, that's unfair. It's like, is it though? Like, what do you think the future for them would be? And also, what do you think the afterlife is like?
Mm-hmm.
And so
I think a lot of times we have those questions. I actually have never bothered with that. It's, again, part of just my faith, much like Sarah said. It's not up to me. You know, it's up to God. God knows what God is doing, and I might be unhappy about it sometimes, but it's not for me to question. But I think when people do express this kind of confusion or disappointment, it's based in a loss or a grief over somebody they know that's sick or died. Like, well, if Jesus healed Jairus' daughter, why can't Jesus heal my mom with cancer? And I think what's valid about that is the feeling of grief and sadness and disappointment that often drives us to want to find somebody to blame. You know, we just need to find a place to put those bad feelings, and we put them into questions about the power of God sometimes. So, but Sarah basically quotes N.T. Wright without knowing it, and she said that this question misses the whole point of the larger story that Mark is telling us. Just as Jesus wasn't coming to be a one-man liberation movement in the traditional revolutionary sense, so he wasn't coming to be a one-man emergency medical center. He was indeed starting a revolution, and he was indeed bringing God's healing power, but his aim went deeper. These things, the healing power, are signs of the real revolution, the real healing that God was going to accomplish through Jesus' own death and resurrection. And he said that they're signposts, these healings, and the 3 stories of resurrection. Their signposts are important, but they aren't the destination. There's a deeper truth to be had in the story. Yeah. Well, Rachel, are you just going to post it on Facebook when you find it?
Well, I found a journal article about Greek understandings of blood. And for a Greek audience, it's really interesting because like blood is essential for life, that it is considered to be the center of life itself. And so you go from this story of like a woman who is like losing life out of her to the story of like a girl who's also lost life out of her. Mm-hmm. And then in both, like Jesus like pours his life back into them. And
well, like the way I learned it, if, for example, one example of that is the ritual bleeding that actually am I going to say this right? The Kohash, the guy who can kill an animal in the proper way so that it's kosher. All of the blood has to be drained from the animal because you cannot eat the blood. And the reason is because life is found in the blood. And so in order for the animal to be clean and edible, there can't be any blood in the meat. So that's just one example of why they believe that, as opposed to believing that, like, when you stop breathing, you die. I mean, all these things are true, but it's just certain cultures put an emphasis on certain aspects of it. And then, of course, you come to our time, and there, sometimes it comes down to electrical impulses in the brain or the brain stem, whether or not we believe there's life. So anyway.
So I also found I'm going to share the New Yorker article I found, which like really goes into these different like relationships with blood and belief, that like they note that specifically like Jesus sort of flips this first century script that like, do not ingest blood. Like there is like sacredness to blood, but don't ingest it. And Jesus is like, transubstantiation. But that the only thing that I'm going to quote is that scholars have debated the reasons for the stark reversal from forbidding the consumption of blood to sanctifying it as a bridge to the divine. Some speculate that by the time of the Second Temple, many Jews were Hellenized, and early converts to Christianity were merely borrowing standard Dionysian rites. For instance, communal agape feasts in which Christians symbolically ate their god's flesh and drank his blood resembled older Greek rituals.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, we have to be able to see all these things as true. That religions conflate, they come together, they're amalgams of several things, often several cultures. Even in modern day Christians, there are so many deeply held beliefs about communion. I know several, very progressive modern Christians, but they don't think it's actually communion unless each person in the community serves each other. So if communion doesn't happen in the context of a love feast, which is actually a big meal, after which the bread is passed among the people, it's not really communion. So and that, again, that comes from the strain of Christianity, fascinating. Well, friends, last thoughts and any needs or prayer requests for the week going forward? Okay, well, see ya then. No, I'm kidding.
Sorry, it's just been a very long day, so I'm very tired.
Yeah. Thank you for coming, Misha.
We love it that you show up even late at night for us.
Well, Wednesdays are my long day, so I have 6 hours of class. And so right before it, so I was like, okay, I'll make dinner, and that was pretty much all I've eaten other than snack food throughout the day. So,
well, it's called dinner discussion for a reason. I keep hoping we can have people back to the house, but I'm going to go with the Spokane County Health District, and if we're not allowed to have more than 10 people, I don't want to say everybody can come back, because if everybody came back, there'd be more than 10. So I have to allow for the potential of more than 10 people.
Just have an inside group and an outside group.
Do I get to choose who's in and who's out?
Nope, you just have to do a random lottery.
This is an inclusive group. We can't have insiders and outsiders.
Jan, can't you have like like I know a lot of places like gyms and like exercise classes are doing like a sign up, and then it's first come first serve, and when it fills up to 10, nobody else can sign up for that particular day.
Yeah, I suppose we could go there. I'm really waiting for cases to stay on a downward trend in Spokane County. And we had a huge spike 2 days ago. We had over 100 cases one day. So that was concerning. And now that schools are back in session, I'm just waiting for the next outbreak. So I'm trying to be safe, and I also miss you guys a ton and wish you could come back. So
Yeah, us too.
But this week for us is pretty standard and boring, right? I am doing something on Friday that I'm actually not entirely sure what will happen, but an event has been created by and for the Black churches here in Spokane, and they're calling it More Than Words. And they've invited white faith leaders to come and I don't know what, do some act of penance or something for the white church. And I was invited to go, and even though I told them I'm not technically a faith leader anymore, they still said they want me there. So I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's important in this current horrible racial climate we got going on. So I'll be doing that on Friday. If any of you want to find it on Facebook, it's called More Than Words. Here in Spokane, I don't know, I don't think it'll be televised, but I don't know, they might do a Facebook live feed. But that's about it for us. Anybody else got anything happening? No? All right.
Nothing terribly exciting.
School, school, and more school.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, Rachel, thank you so much for all that you brought to us tonight. Anybody is welcome at any time, especially if you look forward to what we'll be looking at next week, which is this point is Mark 6, and something strikes your fancy or you find some cool thing, feel free. You know, I'm happy to turn over the microphone to anybody. So, okay. All right. Love you, friends.
Love you guys.
Bye.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.